As the title suggests, I'm going to talk about trading zones and interactional expertise and relate it to the focus of the Global Conference on Research, Integration, and Implementation, focusing especially on integration, but talking some about implementation. These are two core concepts, methods, and tools in achieving integration. And you can see my institutional affiliation there on the screen. Trading zones are necessary when very different disciplinary communities have to work together. And very different in this case means practically incommensurable. In other words, they speak such different languages and have such different foundational conceptual frameworks that they talk past one another. Here's an example. I'm trying to create a nanotechnology major with a core societal dimensions theme. And some of the disciplines I'm working with are electrical and computer engineering and materials science, and already those two have very different outlooks and attitudes that may make communication different. But add in social psychology, and now you have a completely different kind of field with different conceptual foundations. Add ethics onto that, and you've got yet another important area that often has difficulty communicating at a deep level with other fields. Although ethicists are good at making ethical generalizations about what fields ought to do, there's only a smaller number of them that can really integrate and sit next to the practitioners and understand what they're doing. And finally, of course, you've got an important educational element, and there are concepts in the education literature and practices that are difficult to explain to these other fields. And the first step in the nanotechnology major was a nanotechnology undergraduate education proposal that I was the primary author on, but I worked with everyone and met with everyone, and that suggested to me that our differences were not incommensurable, that we're going to be able to form a productive trading zone whether we get the grant or not. And that's something I'll emphasize, is activities like this that tell you whether it's worth even attempting to form a trading zone. Characteristics of trading zones include a common language which evolves from a jargon to a pidgin to a creole. That's from Peter Gallison, who took the concept out of the anthropology literature and used it to explain the development of particle detectors. How could different, apparently incommensurable communities work together on that? The trades include time, resources, knowledge, skills, and other items. And a boundary or object or system can embody a common goal. For example, Gallison also talks about radar in World War II and how that urgent goal, the urgent need to develop radar and develop it fast to save Great Britain from virtual extinction by the Luftwaffe, brought a community together quickly, a very diverse community that otherwise would not have been able to collaborate very effectively. Here's another example. I participated in a communities of integration workshop, and I see that as the beginning of a trading zone. In fact, we explicitly talked about trading zones. And, the workshop was at Arizona State University from May 20th to 24. And the research communities are listed below, and I'll only be able to say a little bit about each and urge you to read more about them. Socio-technical integration research, Eric Fisher was the lead on this. We took approximately 30 graduate students roughly from social sciences and humanities and embedded them in science and engineering laboratories around the world. The graduate students actually became members of the lab and discussed research strategy, discussed the implication of the research, encouraged the lab members to reflect. And in several cases, the lab members reported the science was improved by having these social scientists and humanists embedded with them. Studies of expertise and experience community, founded by Harry Collins and Rob Evans, takes science, technology, and society, methods and concepts, and applies them to the contents of expertise. And they're now doing empirical research using something called the imitation game to determine the existence of a category called interactional expertise, which I'll talk about later. in this presentation. Trading zones, not really a community here. There are a number of us using the concept and pushing its limits, including Peter Gallison and myself, but we have not organized ourselves into communities. Nonetheless, it is a perspective and a potential method that is useful in this conversation. The Toolbox Project, done by the philosophers Michael O'Rourke and Stephen Crowley, is a method that begins with a survey designed to elicit the assumptions of researchers working together in a collaborative way, and then is followed by a discussion of those assumptions. These projects, by the way, are on very different timescales. Social-technical integration takes at least 6 weeks to do. Trading zones may take a very long time. The toolbox may take 3 hours. Finally, Tom Seeger talked about conation, which is a tool, again, that starts with a survey and tells you something about not only your cognitive capabilities, but also your emotional responses and your styles of problem solving and working with others. It's particularly useful in forming groups. Naturally, again, this quick characterization is just that. And when anytime you characterize something quickly, you leave out a lot of important and valuable information. I'm hoping that there'll be other digital posters on some of these perspectives, and where they're not, if all else fails, contact me and I'll direct you to more information. So here's an example of how communities of integration might lead to a trading zone and eventually to a new field. Very simple notion of trajectory, because I think trajectories of trading zones are important too. Remember, we're starting in the beginning with not even really a shared jargon. And we're moving eventually to a Creole and even perhaps to a full-fledged disciplinary language. So we had the communities of integration workshop shown in the bottom. And the workshop established, at least to me, that the linguistic differences could be bridged. These were not incommensurable communities at the start, although there were different terms used in different languages and different assumptive frameworks. There was a real willingness to share, to learn. Now, that means that the Communities of Integration Workshop in itself constituted the beginning of a trading zone, and there's promise to continue that. But one possible outcome is that's where we stop. The communities remain distinct, but trade. We are going to have another workshop to see if we can become more of a community, or whether we'll just continue to exchange knowledge. In either case, one next step is to have a common journal that these communities can publish in and share results. Another one is to have more workshops. The next one will be in Waterloo. And another goal is to trade with other communities that are interested in integration, which is why I'm bringing you this digital poster. Now, an eventual result that some of us like to see is a new field focused on integration, including new expertises for conducting integration that emerge out of these different communities and may even lead to experts that have multiple tools to work in this area. Now, I promised I would talk more about interactional expertise, which I think is an essential capability from this Studies of Experience and Expertise community. An interactional expert is fluent in the language of 2 or more disciplines, but can only do the research in one. Canonical example is how Harry Collins learned to talk the walk of gravitational wave physicists. And by talk the walk, I mean he talked just like somebody who could do the research up to a point. He actually could not do the experiments, although he knew a lot about them. He could not do the mathematics, so he knew something about what kind of mathematics we use. And he could insert himself into a conversation with gravitational wave physicists and be fluent in their language. And they always knew he was not a gravitational wave physicist. He didn't pretend to be something he wasn't, but he was able to make interesting and provocative comments, discuss strategy. He could even make the sorts of jokes that only members of the community could make, which is a key indicator of achieving intellectual expertise. You can use that sort of humor that only members of the community will get. They'll recognize it as a good joke. The intellectual expert can serve as a trade agent in the trading zone, brokering trade between communities before a Creole has developed. There's no demonstration of this yet in the interactional expertise community, but I believe this could happen. Harry Collins himself has not done this. What he's doing right now is doing experimental studies of whether an expert in a field like gravitational wave physics can distinguish between Harry Collins and a gravitational wave physicist, given a small set of questions similar to what you'd ask in a Turing test. And the answer is Harry Collins can pass as the expert in that kind of limited context. I'm interested in seeing if interactional experts can serve as trade agents between these communities and facilitate trading zones. Finally, I've got a more dramatic and complicated example. I and Don Skerbers, who is working with me on this from the Netherlands, have an idea for taking some of the technology assessment methodologies that exist now that involve very close observation by social scientists, ethicists, and others, and turning them into a comprehensive multi-floor methodology. So instead of going into one lab or into one situation, and as you do in the socio-technical integration project of Eric Fisher, why not embed in multiple aspects of a socio-technical system? And so not just the laboratory, which is what Fisher students embedded in, but what about getting some social science and humanists embedded in government agencies, working with the agencies to better understand the technological frontier, also in perhaps science and engineering societies and commercial tech startups and user groups. This might be built around any area of the technology, but it could be nanotechnology. There's some aspect of nanotechnology, for example. And here, instead of showing, here I'm showing a kind of a boundary place or space or zone where these different social scientists and humanists can gather together with other people of expertise, perhaps come to a workshop, special workshop with other people do engagement and talk about what they're finding and observing. And these different social scientists and humanists embedded in these different aspects of a system may themselves be using different languages and different terms, and they'll especially need to come together to see if they can communicate with one another and they can characterize the kinds of things they're observing and seeing and interacting with. And again, the idea here is engagement, not just observations. You actually work to help facilitate, and when you see something that looks like it's going to raise ethical problems, you try to get the experts themselves, the scientists, the engineers, the policymakers, to see it for themselves and not just take it from you, so they gain some of the ability themselves to think more deeply and reflect more deeply about their work. Anyway, this is a bold idea which I've only hastily sketched. Again, if any of you are interested, please feel free to contact me to find out more about this. And then one good place to find out more about trading zones and interactional expertise is this 2010 volume that has the best and most recent work. Not just mine, fortunately, but I've got Peter Gallison in there, and Eric Fisher's in there, and Harry Collins and Rob Evans are in there in a collaborative piece they did with me, and Rob Evans has a piece. So this is a good place to find out more about trading zones and interactional expertise. It's with MIT Press. Here, I'll just leave on the screen for a moment the flyer for it, so you can get a little bit more idea of who the authors are and what the topics are. It may be hard to read this, but at any rate, if you want to know more, look for the book. And if any of you are more interested in this idea of doing these multi-level, multi-stage technology engagements in a particular area or field, please contact me. Don and I are working on a draft paper, which we should have out very, very soon. We have some draft presentation slides, and this is an area where we welcome suggestions and other ideas, as I do in any of this material. Thank you very much.